The concierge did not even look up when she walked in. That was the first thing. Not the words that came after. Not the way the lobby fell quiet in the particular careful way that lobbies do when someone has decided a person does not belong in them. The first thing was the absence of a glance. The way a person can be so thoroughly dismissed that the dismissal does not even require acknowledgement. Her name was Nkechi Afolabi. She was 43 years old. She was wearing a gray wool coat she had owned for 6 years, not because she could not afford another one, but because she had never found a reason to replace something that still did its job. She was carrying a canvas tote bag with the name of a Toronto public library printed on the side. Her hair was natural, gathered loosely at the back of her neck. She wore no jewelry except the small stud earrings she had worn every day since her mother pressed them into her hands the morning. Nkechi left for university on a scholarship that had required her to write 14 separate applications and revise her personal statement 9 times. She had flown in from Vancouver that morning on a commercial flight. She had not upgraded her seat. She never did. She found she could not think clearly in first class. Something about the deference, the constant small attentions, the way it arranged the world into the version of itself that she distrusted most. The version that wanted her to believe things were simple and comfortable and earned. The hotel was called the Meridian Grand. It occupied the top 18 floors of a glass tower in downtown Toronto, and its lobby had been designed to communicate, in marble and low lighting and the faint smell of white tea, that not everyone was welcome. It communicated this with extraordinary effectiveness. She had stayed here before. Not as a guest. She had come twice in the past 8 months for meetings with the hotel's parent company, Carver Hospitality Group, whose quarterly filings she had been reviewing since the previous autumn. Both times, she had been escorted from a private entrance by someone from the executive team. Both times, she had seen nothing of the lobby except the threshold and the elevator. Tonight, she had arrived alone. A commercial taxi, not a car service. A coat, not a statement. A library tote, not a branded portfolio. She had done this deliberately. She had been doing this deliberately her entire professional life, long before she had the resources to do it any other way, because she had discovered early that the truest information about any company was gathered in the spaces where the company believed it was not being observed. The concierge was a man of perhaps 35, well-groomed, with the particular posture of someone who has learned to perform welcome as a technique rather than a disposition. His name tag said Brendan. He was finishing a note in a leather-bound book when Nkechi reached the desk. He completed the note. He closed the book. He looked up, and in the half-second before he arranged his expression, there was something else there. Something that moved through his face the way a cloud moves across still water, briefly and without announcing itself. His smile arrived a beat late. "Checking in," he said, and the tone was the kind of tone that contains a question inside the question. "I have a reservation," Nkechi said. "Afolabi, 2 nights." Brendan's fingers moved to the keyboard. He typed slowly, in the way of someone hoping the system will produce a result that confirms the conclusion he has already drawn. It did not produce that result. The reservation was there. Junior suite, full rate, confirmed 4 days prior. "Ah," he said, and the word did considerable work. "I'm going to need to verify some additional details." He asked for identification she had already placed on the counter. He asked for a credit card she had already extended toward him. He took both, turned to the screen, and began what appeared to be a process of verification that bore no relationship to the speed at which he had processed the 2 guests ahead of her. A man in a charcoal suit paused near the elevator bank and looked in their direction. He did not say anything. He waited. Brendan returned her identification. "I'm seeing your reservation," he said carefully, as though seeing it were a discovery rather than a confirmation. "But I'm going to need to move you to a different room. We've had a plumbing issue with the junior suite wing. I'd like the room I booked," Nkechi said. "Unfortunately, which rooms," she asked, without raising her voice, "are currently affected by the plumbing issue?" Brendan paused. I can speak with your manager if that would be more efficient, Ninkechi said. Not as a threat, as a logistical observation. Something shifted at the edge of the desk. The man in the charcoal suit had moved closer. He had the practiced ease of someone who has spent years deciding which conversations to enter and which to allow. He placed one hand on the counter beside Brendan's elbow and smiled at Nkechi with the particular warmth that wealthy men deploy toward women they have assessed and found wanting. These things happen, he said. Best to just take what they give you, honestly. The rooms are all perfectly fine, he gestured vaguely at the lobby. This is a good hotel. Ninkechi looked at him for one measured moment. I didn't ask you, she said. His expression moved through surprise, then recalibration, then the thin smile of a man who has decided to find something amusing rather than admit he has been rebuked. Brendan had apparently found the plumbing issue resolved in the interval, because he was now printing a key card for the original room. A young woman named Tai had been watching from the concierge support desk along the far wall. She was 26, 8 months into her position at the Meridian Grand, and she had spent those 8 months learning the precise choreography of the lobby, the way you learn a language by immersion, through pattern and repetition, and the occasional moment of startling clarity. She had watched Brendan with guests across that desk for the entirety of her tenure. She knew his rhythms. She knew the difference between his standard processing speed and the one she had just witnessed. She also knew something Brendan did not know she knew. The week prior, she had been asked to prepare a binder of background information on upcoming investor meetings for the general manager, a task that had required her to compile materials from the parent company's investor relations portal. One of the documents in that portal had contained a photograph attached to a capital brief. She had almost not noticed it. It was a small headshot in the upper left corner of a 2-page summary, but she had noticed it, and she had read the name beneath it, and she had read the first paragraph of the brief, and she had set the binder down on the desk and read the whole document before she remembered. She was supposed to be preparing it for someone else. She looked at the woman standing at Brendan's desk. She looked at the coat, the tote bag, the quiet, contained stillness of someone who was making a decision rather than reacting to one. She went to the back office and pulled up the investor portal on the staff tablet. What she found confirmed what she already believed she knew. Nkechi Afolabi had not set out to become the kind of person who appeared in capital briefs. She had set out to solve a specific problem she had encountered while working her first job after university, a junior analyst position at a logistics firm in Mississauga, where she had watched a company lose 3 months of productivity because its internal communication infrastructure was built on systems that had been designed for a different century and patched so many times they had become unrecognizable from the outside and completely opaque from within. She had spent her evenings and weekends for 11 months, building a prototype for something better. She had shown it to her manager, who had shown it to his manager, who had thanked her and attributed the idea to a working group in a subsequent meeting she had not been invited to attend. She had left the firm 6 weeks later. She had taken her prototype and 2 colleagues who believed in it, and a line of credit that required her to use her mother's house as collateral, a fact she had not told her mother until the line was repaid, which it was, in full 22 months later. The company she built, Kalahari Systems, had grown from those 3 people in a rented space above a print shop in Scarborough to a company that now served 47 enterprise clients across Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Its infrastructure platform had become the operational backbone for 3 of Canada's largest financial institutions and 2 of its largest hospital networks. It was not the kind of company that appeared in consumer advertising. It was the kind of company that appeared in the financial press only when someone was trying to acquire it, which had happened twice, and both times Nkechi had declined. She owned it entirely. She had never taken outside capital. She had never needed to. 6 months ago, the Carver Hospitality Group had approached her investment office about a potential strategic partnership, not an acquisition, a restructuring investment. They needed capital, specific capital, and they needed someone whose operational understanding matched the scale of the transformation they were claiming to undertake. Marcus in her legal office had flagged the proposal as worth reviewing. She had reviewed it. She had found it credible enough to pursue. She had spent 6 months conducting the kind of due diligence that she conducted on every opportunity she considered seriously, which meant visiting their properties unannounced, eating in their restaurants, staying in their rooms when she could manage it without being recognized, and watching with the patience she had cultivated over 2 decades of building something from nothing, how the company behaved when it believed no one who mattered was paying attention. Tonight had been the final visit. The signing was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Her legal team had been on standby for a week. She took the key card from Brendan without looking at him. She crossed the lobby to the elevator. She pressed the button and waited, and in that waiting she was very still, in the way she was always still when she was deciding something, a quality that people who had worked with her for years had come to understand as not passivity, but its opposite. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The man in the charcoal suit was also walking toward the elevator. He caught the door with one hand, the casual entitlement of a man who has never doubted his welcome anywhere. He stepped in. He nodded at the panel. "Which floor?" Ninkichi pressed her floor without answering. He pressed his own. The doors closed. "No offense earlier," he said, in the tone of a man who has decided to offer an absolution he is not actually seeking forgiveness for. "I just find these situations go smoother when you don't make a production of it." Ninkichi looked at the panel. "They have certain protocols," he continued. "The staff. You can't take it personally." She turned her head and looked at him with an expression so completely devoid of performance that it appeared to disconcert him slightly. "What is your name?" she asked. He told her. "Jeffrey Alderton." He said it the way men say their names when they expect the name to do something. "Jeffrey," she said, "I've been navigating protocols in lobbies like this one since before you knew what a lobby was. I don't need advice on how to manage my own experience." She looked back at the panel. "But I appreciate you offering it." The elevator reached his floor. He stepped out. She watched the doors close. She went to her room. She set the tote bag on the chair by the window. She stood for a moment looking at the lights of the city below, the winter dark pressing against the glass, the CN Tower blinking red at the edge of her field of vision. She opened her phone. She found her lead counsel's name, a woman named Patricia Ose-Boateng, who had worked with Nkechi for 11 years and who had been waiting with professional patience for this call. She typed a 4-word message. Patricia would understand it. She always did. Then she put the phone face down on the nightstand and sat in the chair by the window and looked at Toronto in the dark and thought for a long time about what she was doing and whether she was certain, and she was certain, and that was enough. In the morning, at 7:43, she sent a second message. Patricia replied in under 2 minutes. The formal letter of withdrawal from Carver Hospitality's proposed transaction was transmitted by Patricia's office at 9:15, before the Carver board had assembled for what they had believed would be a signing day. The letter was brief and used the specific legal language that means everything and explains nothing. The investor has determined not to proceed at this time. No further comment. No invitation for discussion. The general manager of the Meridian Grand, a man named Douglas Hartley, learned about the letter at 9:47 in a phone call from his counterpart at Carver's head office in Calgary. He was standing in the lobby when the call came in. He moved to his office and closed the door. He sat at his desk for some time after the call ended. Then he reviewed the previous night's check-in log, which was part of his standard morning routine. He saw Nkechi's reservation. He saw the note Brendan had added, and he felt a specific, sinking recognition that was not yet understanding, but was the shape of it. Ty had sent a message to the general manager's assistant the previous night at 11:17. It had been flagged as low priority and routed to the next morning's review queue, where it sat until 8:52, 50 minutes before the letter from Patricia's office arrived. By the time Douglas read Tai's message, with its attached screenshot of the investor, brief and its quiet, careful account of what she had witnessed at the check-in desk, the withdrawal had already been transmitted. He read the message twice. He looked at the photograph in the attachment. He looked at the check-in log again. He called Brendan into his office at 10:20. Brendan arrived with the professional composure of someone who has not yet understood that composure is no longer available to him. He had a good record, 4 years at the property, commendations in 2 annual reviews, no formal complaints. He was about to learn that a record is not the same as an understanding. Douglas showed him the attachment. He showed him the log note. He asked Brendan to walk him through the previous evening's check-in interaction. Brendan walked him through it. He used language that was careful and procedural, and that, as Douglas listened, did not account for the things the log note did not say and the things Tai's message did. There were gaps in Brendan's account. The gaps were not lies so much as a very organized form of omission. The kind of story a person tells when they have told themselves, without quite naming it, that what they did was defensible. Douglas listened to the whole account. Then he told Brendan, in the quiet and specific way that carries more weight than volume, exactly what he understood to have happened. Brendan's composure did not collapse so much as it became gradually transparent. And through it, visible to both of them, was something that Brendan had never quite examined directly. The assumption beneath the assumption. Not that the woman had done something wrong. The assumption that she had needed to prove something she hadn't been asked to prove because of what she looked like, and what she was carrying and how she had arrived. The Carver board convened an emergency call at 11. The withdrawal, combined with the timing and the still fragmentary, but already spreading account of what had occurred in the lobby, was producing precisely the kind of confluence that boards dread and that communications teams are not equipped to stop, once the pieces are already visible to the right people. A financial journalist in Toronto who covered hospitality and real estate had a contact at Carver's investor relations office. That contact, under no obligation to say anything, but also under no particular instruction not to, mentioned in passing that a significant institutional commitment had dissolved overnight under circumstances that were not yet publicly characterized. The journalist, who understood what not yet publicly characterized meant in this context, filed a short item at 11:43. It was 3 paragraphs long. It was accurate. The item ran under the headline, Carver Hospitality loses major investor commitment hours before signing. Source cites undisclosed incident at flagship Toronto property. Carver's stock was not large. It did not have the trading volume to produce the kind of collapse that makes financial news internationally. But it lost 6% before 1 o'clock. The conversation among its institutional investors, of which there were 14, was quiet and rapid and extremely attentive to what the item had not said. What it had not said was producing, in the minds of 14 institutional investors with fiduciary obligations, exactly the questions that the investor relations team was not prepared to answer. By 2 in the afternoon, the item had been picked up by 2 larger outlets. One of them had reached Tai. She had not planned to speak to anyone. She had sent the message to the general manager and had believed that was the appropriate thing and the end of her involvement. When the journalist reached her through a contact at the hotel she had not known she had, she said only that she had observed something she felt needed to be reported through the proper channels, and that she had done so. She declined to say more. The journalist published that much. It was, in the particular way of stories that are missing their central voice, more interesting for what it did not contain. Nunkechi was not in her room. She had checked out that morning at 7:30. She was in a meeting across town that had nothing to do with Carver. Her assistant, a methodical and unreadable man named Daniel, who had worked with her for 7 years, and who communicated primarily in complete sentences and extremely useful information, had been fielding complaints from 2 journalists and a producer at a CBC business program since noon. He had told all of them the same thing, which was that Ms. Afalabi was aware of developments and would respond at the appropriate time. Daniel had privately established, in consultation with Patricia, that the appropriate time was Wednesday morning, when the news cycle would have been allowed to develop its own internal logic, when the factual record would be established, and when Nkechi's voice would arrive into a space already shaped by the things that were already true. She appeared on Wednesday on the CBC business program. It was a morning interview, 9 o'clock, conducted by a host named Rosalind, who had been interviewing executives and public figures for 16 years, and who was known for a particular quality of attentiveness that meant her subjects found it difficult to deploy the kind of language that fills space without meaning anything. Nkechi sat in a chair in a dark blazer and looked at Rosalind with the same quality of attention she gave to everything that mattered to her, which was complete and direct and contained no performance. Rosalind asked her to describe what had happened. Nkechi described it. She used the same register she would use to describe a data discrepancy in a quarterly report. She did not editorialize. She said that she had arrived at a hotel where she held a confirmed reservation and had been subjected to a check-in process that differed materially from the process applied to other guests, and that a fellow guest had offered her unsolicited advice on how to manage being treated that way, and that she had found this clarifying. Rosalind asked what she meant by clarifying. It confirmed what I had already begun to suspect about the culture of the organization, Nkechi said. Not the individual employee, the culture. A single employee behaving this way can be an anomaly. An employee behaving this way in a lobby full of people, including another guest who treats it as normal and appropriate to advise me on how to accept it, is not an anomaly. It's a texture. It's what the company actually is, below the level of what the company says it is. Rosalind asked whether she had considered that the check-in clerk might simply have been having a difficult evening. I've been having difficult evenings in lobbies like that one for 20 years, Nkechi said. I know the difference between someone having a bad night and someone making a decision. Rosalind asked about the withdrawal. Nkechi said that she had withdrawn her investment commitment and did not intend to return to the Carver negotiation. She said the capital would be redirected. She said she had, for the past 3 months, been in parallel conversation with a smaller hospitality company, a Canadian-owned mid-market hotel group called Birchfield Properties, that had approached her initially about a technology partnership, and that had, in her assessment, built something genuinely unusual, an organizational culture where the stated values were not aspirational but operational. She said she had visited 7 Birchfield properties unannounced over the prior year. She had stayed in the rooms, eaten in the restaurants, observed the lobbies. She said that in each property, what she had encountered was staff who treated every guest as though that guest's comfort and dignity were the entire point of the work, not a performance given when someone important was watching, but the default, the baseline, the thing they actually did. She said she was investing in that. Rosalind asked how much. Nkechi named a figure. It was specific. It was, by the standards of the hospitality sector, meaningful. Birchfield Properties had not expected to be named on the program. Their investor relations team, which consisted of 2 people in a shared office in Halifax, had been contacted by Daniel the previous afternoon, and had been told, with the measured understatement that characterized most of Daniel's communications, that there might be some increased public interest in the company Wednesday morning. This had not prepared them for what actually happened. Birchfield stock increased by 22% in the first 90 minutes after the program aired. Their website received more traffic in 1 hour than it typically received in 2 months. Their general inquiry inbox received 47 messages by noon, including 11 from journalists and 3 from other potential investors. Carver, by contrast, had issued a statement Tuesday afternoon expressing commitment to an inclusive guest experience and announcing an internal review of service protocols. The statement had been received the way such statements are received when they arrive too late and without specificity. Their 2 largest institutional investors filed requests for briefings, One had already begun reducing its position. Douglas Hartley resigned on Thursday. He cited personal reasons, which is the language that means the reasons are not personal at all. Brendan was placed on administrative leave pending the completion of the internal review. He had been home since Tuesday morning, which was when his company access had been suspended. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Etobicoke, with a view of a parking structure and a kitchen table where he sat most of the afternoon watching his phone accumulate notifications he had not decided what to do with. He had expected, when he'd driven to work on Monday morning, that the week would be a week. He had not expected it to become the rest of the year. He was not a bad person in the way that most people are not bad people when the category is applied loosely enough. He had not woken up Monday morning with the intention of doing harm. He had gone to work, and he had done the thing he had been doing without examining it, which is its own kind of intention. The kind that accountability eventually finds regardless of how it was labeled at the time. He thought about the woman at the desk. He thought about the speed with which he had processed her reservation compared to the one before it. He tried to construct the version of the story where he had simply been thorough, where the additional questions had been protocol rather than suspicion, where the tone of his voice had been professional rather than pointed. He could build parts of that story. He could not make it hold. He called his brother on Thursday evening. He did not tell his brother the details. He said that he had done something at work that he didn't know how to describe, and that was probably going to cost him. His brother, who was 2 years younger and had spent 3 years working a warehouse job before it was eliminated, and knew something about the gap between what work is supposed to mean and what it actually produces, said simply, "You know what you did, right?" And Brendan said yes, and his brother said then, "That's where you start." Ty was called into the general manager's office on Thursday. The interim general manager, a woman named Christine, who had come from the company's Ottawa property, and who had the focused, unsentimental quality of someone brought in to stabilize rather than to comfort, sat across from her and thanked her, in the specific terms of a person who means it, for sending the message she had sent. She said that Ty had done the right thing and that the company intended to ensure the right thing was recognized as such. Ty said that she had not sent the message to be recognized. She had sent it because she had seen something happen and known it was wrong and understood that doing nothing is also a choice. Christine looked at her for a moment. She said she would like Tye to be part of the service culture working group that the company was assembling as part of the Birchfield partnership terms. Ty said she would consider it. She did consider it for about 48 hours, during which she read about Birchfield Properties and about Kalahari Systems and about Nkechi Afolabi, whose background she had only partially known from the investor brief and now understood more fully. Then she said yes. Nkechi did not meet with Brendan. That was not a decision she made dramatically. It was a decision she made the way she made most decisions, by determining what purpose the meeting would serve, and finding the purpose insufficient. There was no arrangement to be reached. There was no information she needed from him. She understood what had happened in that lobby, with perfect clarity, without requiring him to explain it. And she did not believe that her willingness to sit across from him would constitute the thing that people sometimes label forgiveness, but which more often functions as a kind of housekeeping, a way of completing a narrative for the benefit of the person who had caused the harm. What she did instead, 2 weeks after the Wednesday interview, was visit the neighborhood in Scarborough where she had started the company. She had a meeting at the community center with the board of a youth technology program she had been funding for 4 years. The program was called Baseline, and it worked with young people who were doing what she had done, identifying a problem and trying to build a solution to it with the resources they had, which were rarely sufficient and almost always underestimated. She sat at the table with 8 young people between the ages of 17 and 24, and she listened to each of them describe what they were building. There was a 17-year-old from Brampton who was building an inventory management tool for small grocery stores owned by first-generation immigrant families. There was a 20-year-old from Regent Park who was working on a scheduling platform for PSW workers because her grandmother had been a PSW for 21 years and had never once had a shift schedule she could count on farther than 48 hours in advance. Nkechi asked them questions. She asked not about their market size or their growth projections, but about the specific moment when they had understood that the problem they were solving was real, the moment the abstract had become concrete, the moment they had felt it. The 20-year-old from Regent Park said it was when her grandmother had missed her granddaughter's birthday, the third one in a row, because the schedule had changed that morning. She said she had watched her grandmother come home that evening and stand at the kitchen counter for a while without speaking, and she had understood that the missing birthday was not the problem. The missing birthday was what the problem looked like when it reached a person. Nkechi was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "that's the thing. Find that moment, the one where it became real. Build toward that. Everything else follows from that." She did not give a speech. She had not come to give a speech. She had come to listen, which is a form of presence that is rarer than it should be, and that she had been practicing since long before she could afford to fund anything. She stayed for 2 hours. On her way out, a young man who had not said anything during the meeting caught up with her at the door. He was 19. He was building something in the environmental monitoring space and was stuck on an infrastructure question that she happened to know something about. And they stood near the exit of the community center for 20 minutes talking about it. And he left the conversation with something he had not had before, which is the most she had ever wanted from any meeting. In the car on the way home, Daniel told her about the 4 interview requests that had come in that afternoon. She declined 3 and asked him to review the 4th. She looked out the window at the city. Scarborough in the early dark, the streets she had driven through 10,000 times on a transit card she had loaded $5 at a time, when $5 was what she had. She knew what was in the corner store on Markham Road. She knew the hours the laundromat on Lawrence kept on Sundays. She knew things about this part of the city that had never been in any brief any investor relations team had ever prepared about her, because those briefs began with the company and moved backward only as far as the point where the success became visible, and the things she knew about Scarborough were from before the success, from the part that did not look like anything yet. The car moved through the intersection. The lights changed. She thought about the lobby. She thought about the particular quality of being looked through, the way it had a texture, the way she had learned to carry it, the same way her mother had learned to carry it, and her grandmother before that, the way it was transferred, not through words, but through something more cellular, the knowledge of what it costs to be present in certain rooms and what it costs not to be. She thought about Taye, who had sent an email at 11:17 at night after being told, implicitly and by the entire structure of the place she worked in, that this was not hers to fix. And she thought about what it means when someone in a position of less power decides to act correctly at personal cost, and how rarely that decision gets named for what it is, which is courage, the ordinary, unremarkable kind that the world depends on and almost never thanks. She would reach out to Taye directly, not through Daniel, not through the partnership structure, directly. She had not decided yet what she would say. She would figure that out when she got there. She put her phone in her bag. She looked at the city through the window. The streetlights made the snow on the sidewalks amber, and the shadows between the houses deep, and the whole thing had the quality of something that was simply hers. Not in ownership, in belonging. The rarer kind. She had built something real in this city. And she had done it from less than most people began with, and she had not done it by becoming someone other than herself, which is the thing that gets treated, in the stories people tell about success, as though it were incidental. She knew it was not incidental. She knew it was the entire structure, that the coat and the tote bag and the absence of performance were not modesty or disguise. They were the thing itself. They were the reason she still knew what she knew, and saw what she saw and understood, without requiring anyone to confirm it. What the lobby had told her about Carver, and what the street outside the community center had told her about the next decade of her work. She was not finished. She was never finished. That was the other thing about building something real. It does not arrive at a state of completion. It simply continues, and the question is whether you continue with it. And she had answered that question every morning for 20 years, and she would answer it again tomorrow. In the same way, with the same quiet and unperformable certainty that had gotten her here from Scarborough on a transit card loaded $5 at a time.